Wow, that's sorry. This is working out well this morning, apparently. Good morning, everyone. Um, I apologize for that. Allergies are killing me. Um, so I'm gonna give everyone a few more minutes to hop on, then we'll kick off today. Um, things are going well. I will not be on Daniela's show tonight. I got some things I got to do. So, life. Um, I see there's a conversation about Dr. Gene Kim. I'm aware of him. I'm there were some things I've seen. I don't know that I'm if it's the same person I'm thinking of, because the problem is I'm terrible with names. So if it's the same guy I'm thinking of, I think, I mean, he's probably actually. You know what? Why am I even saying this? Let me double check, because if it's the same guy, I'm going to say he's okay, but I'm not a big fan. But he may not be the same person I'm thinking of. I'll get rid of that. Dr. Gene. Well, he pulled up pretty quick. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, this is the guy I'm thinking of. I mean, he's okay. I mean, I don't know that I would put too much in him, right? So I so here's the thing, right? I really do try to be, because a lot of this could be said about me. So let me say it that way. Um, yeah. So hey, Daniela. We're gonna be going through everyone here in a second, just to say how did everyone, give everyone a chance to look at it. Like I said, I'm not all that up on him. I've only seen parts of a couple of videos that he's done. I will say this: everyone's saying he's not nice. He likes to call people names. I don't think that's appropriate. I think that's counterproductive, but I also think it's petty. I'm also not going to sit here and say that means you should not listen to the guy per se. Everyone has a different way of looking at it. A lot of people would, I think, today would criticize Elijah for how he treated the prophets of Baal, right? I mean, because when you get into the text, when what is Elijah's out there, he ain't being nice. So I will give people a little bit of leniency on it. I'm not a big fan of it, but I to each his own. Like I said, but I haven't seen it, so maybe it does cross the line. I just am not aware. I would just say that I think his works are the work that I have seen him do. Um, I think he's not he and I think would share different patterns and different techniques. I like to stay grounded with what I can prove, right? When we talk about the Nephilim, again, we've spent 2 episodes talking about the Nephilim, only addressing the text, right? And the text only. And we've even in our discussion of the text, we've actually cordoned off some other non-biblical texts or extra biblical texts, because and I explained why. I don't think they're reliable. I don't think we can really take that as something we should work with per se. And we're gonna explore more into what it is, because the problem is, I think he falls into the same line that a lot of people, good people, and who are studying some of the more esoteric aspects of the Bible, and when you get into things like cryptozoology, the paranormal, you start to understand the modern culture doesn't want to address a lot of this stuff at all, right? Um, and so, unfortunately, those of us in the fringe, unfortunately, they unmoor themselves and they go off into these tangents, and it's like, you don't know that, like, that there's stuff you can't really prove. And a great example of this would be the question about sirens that show up throughout. The word siren shows up in the Old Testament. It shows up in the book of Enoch. And so the question becomes, what's the origin of them? And in the book of Enoch, it talks about the wives of the Watchers becoming sirens. So everyone takes this to mean mermaids. Okay. So it's and so the thing is, though, the more I've looked into it, it sounds like an explanation for mermaids, which freaked me the heck out, almost as much as giant spiders. So but at the same time, the more you look into the words that we translate as siren from the Greek, when you compare it against where it's used in the Old Testament and the Hebrew that's used there, it tends to make me think this is not about mermaids, right? It's not. They're not talking about Ariel. They're talking about female demonic entities. So the problem is, I think a lot of people tend to, and again, I'm not trying to, I'm not trying, I'm trying to be polite, and I'm trying, if this were to get back to someone, I would like to say, look, I think this is where a mistake has been made, and this is where something could be done. I don't like to criticize. I would like to critique. In order, again, the spirit is for y'all to learn, and ultimately, if they were to hear it, they would understand that I'm not saying anything mean. I'm simply trying to express how this could perhaps be done better. Again, that's my perspective. I just think, unfortunately, he falls into the same trap that a lot of very good, well-meaning people fall into when you sort of get off the mainstream and start looking at the reality of the world. And unfortunately, when you become unmoored, people, they don't check they don't check the work the way they should. Instead, they're like, well, here's all these strange ideas. I'm going to go with them, and I'm going to look for things that support that idea. They never try to falsify it, right? And that's so. To Gene's point, there's a lot of things there. Again, I don't know him very well. I've not really looked into his work, so I'm not going to criticize him per se. All I'm going to say is the things that or critique him per se. The stuff that I have seen, I wasn't overly impressed with. But that's me. And again, you're all saying that he does seem to be rude. So I would advise against it. It's not something I do. I don't think it's beneficial to be rude. Let me phrase this. There are times when sometimes you do need to be less polite than others. I'll say it that way. I just don't think that should be a common demeanor, right? So Titan. So okay, you're the whole concept of the seed. That's actually what we're getting into. So here's the thing. I'm not going to at this point comment on anything that he has said per se, beyond what you've just said that this seed is physical. Here's the thing. I do think it is. I would agree with him. I think there is a physical component to this. I just don't think that. Again, most people who go with the serpent seed, they're going with things like Cain. There's a lot of anti-Semitism wrapped up in that. There's bad hermeneutics attached to that. I do think the Nephilim, though, I think that is far more the seed than what people realize. Going back several months, we talked about, my book, how Lucifer is not Satan. I do believe Lucifer is the prophetic name of the Antichrist that occurs at the end. But the thing is, the Antichrist is a spirit as well. And I think that spirit is the spirit of a Nephilim. I think it could be a spirit that's pre-flood. It could be that Nimrod made himself into a Nephilim somehow. So it is, like I said, we're going to talk about that. This is all going to be part of our Nephilim conversation. So if we were to say that, if we're talking about the Nephilim, yes, I think this is very much physical. In fact, it kind of ties into what we're talking about today, the new perspective on Paul. There is, I think, in modern Protestant Christianity, we have separated physical activity in the physical from the spiritual far too much. I think we've created a far too great a divide. I don't know that the supernatural and the natural are as separate as we think. I think they may actually combine way more than we realize. So we'll talk about that here when we talk about the new perspective on Paul. Again, as far as Dr. Gene Kim goes, I'm not a fan per se. I'm also not a detractor. I just think from what I have seen, his work needs a little refinement. Yes, I do think that the spirit of the Antichrist well, here's the thing. I don't think it's going to be asked into a body per se. I think they're making a body for it. I don't think that the Antichrist at the end will be human. I think it will be a Nephilim. And I've talked about this in Revelation a little bit. I think it's going to be a Nephilim body that is provided for the spirit to inhabit, because anyone who is possessed, we see this. Anyone who is actually possessed of a demon, they are uncontrollable, because the spirit or spirits inhabiting that body are in conflict with the soul that naturally resides there. I believe they're trying to manufacture a Nephilim body that has no inherent soul. It has no inherent spirit, so so the Antichrist spirit can inhabit it and act without conflict. Am I necessarily going to die on that hill? No, but that's my reading. And a big part of that is the fact that he is thrown physically into the lake of fire. He is not judged. I mean, you could argue that that's his judgment, but what I mean is there are no books pulled for him. He and the false prophet are literally picked up and chucked into the lake of fire. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. There's no books. There's nobody reading anything. Jesus is like, you're out of here. I find that very interesting, because all humans are judged. The books of our deeds are opened, right? So it's I don't think that the Antichrist and the false prophet will be humans in the traditional sense. I think they will be Nephilim, and that there will be, so the reason for that is it is clear by the angels that fall, they're not judged, right? They know what they did, so there is no forgiveness, there's no judgment, there's no going through and proving legally. They're just done. That's why I would argue that's the main argument for that. Titan, since the Lord is the father of nations, Israel being his firstborn. Okay, so that's a great question. We're actually going to address that in our conversation today. So let me say with this a little bit more directly at that question. Yes and no. Again, I'm going to make a statement here. It'll make more sense towards the end, but to answer that question, the atom is the solar system, is the galaxy, is the universe. Everything is pattern. Everything is repetition. That's how God teaches us, right? He starts with something small and he makes it larger. That's actually why I entertain this alternate idea that God makes humanity and then he pulls Adam out of humanity. I'm entertaining that because it does feel very, very similar to what happens with Abraham later. However, God pulling Adam out of the ground also works because it's the world. It's the material world that's really being spoken of there. So both kind of work. Again, I'm of the plain reading of the text. I think Adam was created from the earth, from the material world. And that's the whole point, is he's supposed to be representative of the priest between God and the material world, as that was all of humanity's role, right? So, yes, I think that the idea of there being conflict in nations as part of an inherent I think that's all tied together. I don't think we separate. I think the problem is we shouldn't separate them. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. To Bigfoot, Michigan, and Rob, is a Nephilim body suggesting male, or again, a supernatural being mating with a human female. So, Try to see if I can type a bunch of things here, Mary H. So, okay, I'm going to answer Mary H's question, which brings us to Rob. The modern ancient astronaut theory that is being propagated right now in Marvel movies, DC movies, and television shows. It's Ancient Aliens on the History Channel. It's every major, really almost every major franchise of the last 20 years, right? And this ancient astronaut theory is in designed to be the replacement for Christianity. That's what it's designed to do. Because again, remember, Satan has no original concepts of his own. He just imitates. So that is designed to be that. It's designed to be the explanation for it, which brings us back to Rob. Yes, Nephilim, human and angelic DNA, or non-true human DNA. That's why I was very specific when I said I think the bigger point about the Nephilim today is less about angelic cohabitation per se, as it is genetic manipulation, right? Because I don't think the angels mated with the humans as angels, right? Like I don't think they look like. I think they took human bodies. Those human bodies are lacking things genetically. That's why the Nephilim became giants, right? They were lacking certain genetic codes that because the angels took on human bodies that weren't true human bodies, right? They're imitation. That's why they became the way they did. I think what we're seeing with the UFO phenomena today is to create a Nephilim that passes for human. It is to create a totally manufactured human body that has no native soul, so that a demon can inhabit it. So that's again the concept of the Nephilim for me is less. It's not unconnected from angels and humans, but it's more about the fact that this is a human that should not exist. It's a being, a physical being with human DNA that should not exist. That's the bigger point here. It is not correct, and ultimately will create one that has no. And maybe they have. Maybe they've already. Maybe a lot of what the grays are, the physical ones, are just flesh suits that demons inhabit. That's something a lot of people have talked about for a while, that they are just flesh suits and allows that. So it's something that the demon can inhabit and manipulate things in the world around them. It's sort of like an encounter suit, right? Um, I think that's what we're ultimately going to see with the Antichrist. Again, I'm not going to die on that hill. If it turns out to be that I'm wrong, okay. It's just my reading of the text, and that's why. But again, for me, the Nephilim is far more about manipulation of genetics into something that's not supposed to exist, right? Than anything else. Okay, last question, then we'll say howdy to everybody, and then we'll get into today's conversation. So the story of Adam and Eve could be creation of the world, and not people confused a little bit here. Does the creation of the world and the creation of Adam and Eve connect? Yes. Okay. Adam and Eve are humans. Period. End of story. I think that is the origin of mankind. I think it's very clear that's what it is in the text. But we have to understand again, a lot of this comes back to the context of the people who are originally writing it and reading the texts, right? It is so God creates the material world, right? Again, flat cosmology, not a flat Earth. Earth is a sphere in space around a sun. That's my opinion. The fermentalist will disagree with me, but it's groovy. He'll just owe me a Coke at the rapture, which happens at the end. And we live in this universe that was created by God. All for it. But that's the material world. And in the context of the ancient world, the material world and the earth were the same thing. They just meant, because for them, the entire material world was the earth that they were walking on. That was their perspective. We would say, instead of the earth, the material universe. The earth, the material universe is created. Adam and Eve are created out of this material. Well, Adam is created out of the earth and Eve from Adam. but they are material creatures. We are material creatures. We are designed to live in a material world. Madonna at least got that part right. So it is, so again, Genesis 1 and 2, that is the creation of the physical universe and the creation of mankind. Again, Genesis 2 being the exploded view, at least in my reading, of what happens with the creation of mankind in Genesis 1. So yeah, they're connected, but they are not separate things. I mean, they are separate events, but they are part of the same event, which is the creation of the material world. But Adam is taken out of the earth, Eve from Adam. Okay, actually, last question, Bigfoot, Michigan Rob. I would argue there are no such things as extraterrestrials, meaning aliens of sentient aliens, right? Sentient extraterrestrials that were created by God on a different planet. I don't believe those exist. I think that the UFO phenomena comes down to 3 or 4 different things. One, absolutely, and I think we do not fully understand how involved the government is. I think government technology. I think a lot of black projects, a lot of government technology is really wrapped up in the UFO phenomena. And we know that a lot of government disinformation is CIA, military intelligence, stuff like that, is really big on pumping UFO stuff to cover a lot of their tracks. So again, I think a lot of that is government. 2, I will say divine, meaning supernatural, is a lot of the UFOs, and I would break that down. And those on the angelic side working for God, those working for Satan, and a subset of those working for Satan are physical craft manned by physical pilots that are demonically inspired, like the physical Greys, like the Nephilim. I think they would require physical craft. I think they've built them, and that's when people talk about recovering, extraterrestrial. That's what they're pulling up. I do not believe that there are intelligent aliens created on another planet that have come here. Now, could there be life on these other planets, like simple animal life? Sure, who cares? It doesn't bother me. I think we were actually meant to go into space to visit these other planets. I think God wanted us to see the universe he made. That was the idea. So the idea that there could be plant and animal life out there is no problem for me, right? But again, we're actually going to talk a lot about that and what Titan is asking about Bigfoot and all that. That's all, like I said, when I say we're going to stay with the Nephilim for a good long time on Thursday, I mean a good long time, because to unpack the Nephilim is to unpack and address Bigfoot, UFOs, end times, shapeshifters, genetic manipulation. I mean, all of it. Like, we're going to talk about all of it. So we'll go into more detail later. I don't want to lose track of today, because today is going to be a really, really interesting conversation that does answer some of these other questions. So let's give a quick shout out to everyone who's in the chat today. We've already said hi to Daniela, Jean Hudson, Titan, Mary H, Susan Robertson, Tom Paul Cajun, and I think that Bigfoot Michigan Rob. So howdy to all y'all who have shown up this morning. And of course, a big good morning and howdy to everyone who is watching on the recorded show. That's the beauty of YouTube, is that you get to be a part of this without actually having to be here while it's live, because you can ask questions later, and if we can't address them, we will. So again, if you're not here, you're still welcome, and a good morning to you. And of course, you may be watching in the afternoon. So good afternoon, good evening, happy midnight snacking. I don't know, whenever you're watching it. So let's say thank you also for the money that's been coming in for Alan in Kenya. Y'all are faithful. I think today was actually the second. Was the second? It was, or it's they're like 7 hours behind, I think. So today was their second church meeting in the new location. So things are starting, man, and it's good to see. Eventually, I'd like to make this project bigger. Again, not this per se, because I want to keep it where we can all have these conversations. But the program of being able to go directly to indigenous pastors and indigenous missionaries, indigenous evangelists is really the way to go. So we're working on it. But he says thank you for all y'all who've been able to give. It means a lot to him. It really does. And this is one of those times where $5, $10 means more to him than maybe it would mean to a Western missionary who's traveling abroad. Not to downplay them at all, but it's going to go. But $5 is going to go further with Alan and Kenyon. That's going to go with me traveling over there, right? It's just you're going to get way more bang for your buck. Sort of, to coin a phrase. So let's go ahead and pray, and then we're going to discuss the new perspective on Paul, because I do think it ties into some things we've actually talked about here. I think it helps change our perspective a little bit, and maybe answers, for me, I think it really addresses some issues that I'm seeing in the church writ large as well. But let's definitely pray before we get into that. Heavenly Father, we thank you and we praise you for all that you've done. Father, thank you for bringing us together. Thank you for putting up with our ignorance at times, and definitely my ignorance. Thank you for showing me and us through the Holy Spirit things that we get to learn. I am glad and appreciative of the fact that you grow us, you mature us. You don't expect us to stay where we are. You accommodate our misunderstandings from time to time, and you correct us when we're ready, even when we don't think that we are. Father, help us to stay open to your word. Help us to always sort out and rightly divine your word. Help us to pursue truth, which ultimately is a pursuit of you. Father, please allow everything that is said today to be honoring to you and to bring us all closer to you and your Spirit and your Son. And it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. So the new perspective on Paul. N.T. Wright created, I think he's sort of the big pioneer for this. I will say, I think he may go, like anyone, I think he goes a little overboard very early on in his writings. And I think a lot of people have come along later and sort of course corrected a little thing. Because I think a lot of us, it's like anything else, right? Again, let's go back to Gene Kim. Again, not him specifically, but just that idea of a lot of us who sort of break from the mainstream and really start looking into things for ourselves and start seeing these patterns and start seeing these things that the rest of the world tells us don't exist, like cryptids, living dinosaurs, forbidden archaeology, all this stuff. It's very easy for us to say, okay, and then we just go off on the rails, and then we don't moor ourselves to those things that, we instead of trying to disprove our thoughts and some of our new conclusions, we just run with them, right? I know I'm very prone to that. I recognized this years ago, which is why, again, not just saying I have, which is why I really do try to go out of my way to disprove anything I start looking at. I'm like, okay, let me disprove this. And that way I can, and let me see both sides of the argument, so I can see, is this idea wrong, right? Or is it just that we need some corrections here? Is there maybe there's some points that just make this side better, but we need that conflict to see it. And the problem is people just sort of reject the conflict because something sounds good or looks good or superficially maybe is right, but needs some refinement. So I think N.T. Wright may have taken initially some things wrong. So I do like what people have done with it later. It becomes more of a course correction than a radical change in theology. And to me, I think it allows us to understand Paul and James much better. In fact, he actually kind of already sort of justifies what I think about James in his commentaries, or his talks about works and salvation. Actually, sort of makes a lot more sense that way. So, what is the new perspective on Paul? Basically, again, the more modern view is that, well, actually, let me start with the beginning. N.T. Wright and a lot of other scholars, rabbinical scholars, and historians, noticed that the Protestant church's view of what Paul is writing when he's writing about the law, right? Not being for salvation, those kinds of things. We treated it as if Paul is saying that the Judaism of the time was a works-based salvation. And a lot of rabbinic scholars themselves are the first ones to call this out. And they're like, guys, that's not what we believe. Now, you can argue, but he's arguing against what they believed 2,000 years ago, not today. But a lot of scholars said, well, is that really what he's saying, though? Because they have a point. Was the rabbinic view in the first century that God granted salvation through good works only? Because that's sort of how we've interpreted it for years. And we've seen new writings come out. Again, Dead Sea Scrolls was just this big thing. But we found other things as well, and things that we've had for a while, and they kind of started comparing them, and they realized, and in the big revelation was sort of this idea that first century Judaism wasn't works-based per se. And a lot of people have actually come to sort of accept the premise of what N.T. Wright and them were saying about rabbinic Judaism of the time, which is that to be a Jew in the first century, and probably all the way back, you believed salvation was predicated on your Jewishness. So you were born a Jew. You're already under the covenant, right? That's why they have the certain rituals. You become a man. Well, you're now into, you've become a member of Judaism. And it means you're under that covenant and therefore saved. The acts and works of the law that Paul talks about, when he's referencing that, he's not referencing good works in general, but specifically the deeds that you're supposed to do to stay in good standing with the covenant. That is the basic argument, that rabbinic Judaism wasn't works-based, but rather the works were to keep you within alignment and good standing of the covenant in which you were already under. That's why you could be a Gentile and then you could become Jewish, and then you had to practice the rituals because you became Jewish. That's how you were saved. That was their view. So N.T. Wright and a bunch of others have taken this to say, okay, so then Paul, when he's talking about works of the law, he's talking about circumcision. And a good argument for that actually comes from Acts 15. Right? Because what is the argument in Acts 15? Right? So we have Paul arguing with the Judaizers here. And they're talking about circumcision, right? And so let's start at chapter 15, verse 1. And certain men came down from Judea and taught the brethren, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. Therefore, when Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and dispute with them, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain others of them should go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders about this question. I could go further, but I don't think it's necessary. So here's the thing, right? And we'll jump down to verse 5. So, but some are saying it is necessary to circumcise them and to command them to keep the law of Moses. So, Acts 15, what's this argument? Who are the Judaizers? What are the Judaizers saying? They are saying that to become Christians, you had to become Jewish. And that meant circumcision and what? Obeying the laws of Moses. That's what they were saying. So when later Paul is talking about, he's arguing against the, works and works of law, he is talking very specifically about those um, commandments, those things that are given in the Torah by Moses that you had to do to stay within Judaism, right? It's not just good works at large. Like, I've stopped to help someone change a tire. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about circumcision. He's talking about the ritual baths. He's talking about keeping kosher. He's talking about those things that you had to do to stay within rabbinic Judaism and to stay kosher under the law or under the covenant of Moses is what he is. That's sort of the argument about what he's talking about. Good morning, lamp of light. And so what does that do? How does that affect our reading of Paul? Because if the rabbinic Judaism's perspective at the time was that you were born a Jew or you could become a Jew, and then your good works kept you within the confines of that, you stayed within the covenant, essentially, right? You were doing the things the covenant required you to do, then that made you a good Jew and that kept you within it, and that's how you were saved under the Old Testament law. That was his view. That changes, and this is where it changes. It changes what he is saying a little bit. He's, the basic argument, the good works don't get you into heaven. Okay, right? That stays right there. But it changes the nuance, of why the Judaizers existed, right? Because for them, they're just saying, okay, the new covenant isn't really different from the old covenant. It's just that Jesus has sacrificed himself. Therefore, we we still have to, he's fulfilled this aspect of the law. So we don't need to do the sacrifices anymore because he's done the sacrifice. But we should still do everything else because the law of Moses is still there. He did say he didn't come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. So we just do what we've always done. You got to get circumcised if you're a Jew. You got to keep kosher. You got to keep this. You got to keep this. And you got to keep these laws. These are the laws that keep you within the covenant. It's a new covenant, but the laws would still be the same. That was their opinion, right? So you can actually have more sympathy for the Judaizers now, because it's not just they're like, well, we just think this keeps us, this makes us holier than thou. No, they're just saying, well, okay, Jesus' sacrifice replaces the sacrificial aspects of all this, but the law still remains, so we still have to be Jews. Paul is saying, and we see this in Peter's writings as well, because Peter even says in Acts 15, right? That's his response to this whole, that's his sort of response to this whole controversy, right? During the Jerusalem council, we see in verse 18 where he has a really great. Actually, I'll go a little bit further up. Oh yeah, here it is. Verse 10 says, so this is Peter saying, he's like, hey, now therefore, why do you test God by putting a yoke on the neck of the disciples, which neither our fathers nor their fathers were able to bear? Nor we were able to bear, sorry. But we believe that through the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, we shall be saved in the same manner as they. Because he's talking about how they went to the Gentiles, the Spirit went to the Gentiles, and the Holy Spirit worked in them the same way he did us, being the disciples at the beginning. So Peter is like, okay, I get this. I get what's happening here, right? The Judaizers are kind of working from the original version of Judaism, and what's happening here is something different. Paul then takes it one step further in his writings, right? So we have to remember with like Galatians, a lot of these letters he is writing to Christian churches that were born out of Judaism, right? Out of the old covenant. These were Jews. These were people who knew what was going on. That's why Romans reads a little different, because Romans, he's writing to Christians who primarily weren't Jewish. They were in Rome. Though there were Jews there, a lot, who became Christian, they were also Gentiles. So the basic premise of the New Perspective on Paul is more about the shift here is, instead of you have to be Jewish from the descendant from Abraham, and then you can do something to become a descendant of Abraham to be saved, to be in covenant with God. God's covenant went out to the nations as they were, meaning God is saying, no, the kingdom is going to them as well. So you can be Jewish. And I would even say, if a Messianic Jew today wanted to keep the most, as long as it wasn't the sacrificial things, okay, I'm not going to condemn anyone for someone for doing that, because I get it. I understand. But as a Gentile, it flat out says, I mean, we see the early church wrestling with this question. They're like, we don't see them being under the law. There's no reason for that. So they just said, hey, there's these seven it was really the seven Adamic laws, or the Noahic laws, that were applied to us. We don't strangle animals to kill them. We don't drink blood, things like that. Basic sort of the what are called the Noahic laws would apply to us. But everything beyond that, we don't, because we're not Jewish, because the kingdom is going to the Gentiles now. So it changes what Paul's argument is in this regard. He is saying the problem with Judaism, as it was understood at the time, isn't that it was about a works-based salvation, but rather that it was more ethnically driven. It was retained to just the chosen people of God, to one nation, right? And now it is going to everyone. Again, Jew first, then the Gentile. Well, why? Because that was always the plan. And this is where the whole idea of the firstborn, the child being the nation, also is one and the same, right? God chooses Abraham. Abraham becomes a nation. That nation's designed to be again, just like Adam, the king and priest to the world. That's why you had the covenant of circumcision. That's why you eventually have the Mosaic law. It was to create a nation that would allow Jesus to come into the world, that would allow him to sacrifice himself, and we could understand it. But the role of the Jewish people were to be priests to the world. They didn't do that job very well. We see that all throughout the Old Testament. That's why they're chastised all throughout the Old Testament. You're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, being a light and a priest to the world, so they would understand God, so that the Gentiles could come to God. Now, they would have to come to him at that time by becoming Jews, and then fulfilling the acts of the law to keep them within the covenant. That's what they would have to do. But we see things like Jonah, right? What was Jonah doing? He was basically the first prophet to go to the Gentiles. That's what he was designed to do. That's what God was calling him to do, is this first step into going to the nations to bring them to him. Because the idea was that God is trying to reconcile all of humanity to himself, and that there's a plan for it. That is the basic idea. So how does this change Paul? Again, doesn't change him. It just gives a different connotation. It's still that works don't save us. It's being under the covenant that saves us. All Paul is saying is that he's just reminding everyone, it's like, hey, these works of the law didn't save you to begin with. They just kept you in covenant. Well, it's a new covenant now, and that covenant is different. That there is a change, and that allows us to go to the world, to the Gentiles. The Gentiles can be brought in. Why? Because it's about the kingdom. God is reconciling humanity to himself. That's why in Galatians, right, what is Paul saying here? And then we'll talk about how this lines up with with James here in a second. Sorry, my allergies are killing me. So again, Galatians 3:19. What purpose then does the law serve? It was added because of transgressions. By the way, transgressions here, right? I think this includes the watchers. I'm not the only one who agrees. There's a Heiser and there's a few other scholars who would agree that this. And again, I agree with them because they were the first ones to present this idea, and I think it makes a lot of sense. This is including the watchers. Again, Paul makes so much more sense in a lot of ways when you understand the book of Enoch is in his head, right? Because mankind falls, right? That happens in Eden. They're kicked out. But then what happens? Again, as we'll talk about in more detail on Thursday, the watchers come, they corrupt mankind, they teach us how to do all kinds of worse things, and now things are even worse. So it's transgressions. And again, it was added because of transgressions till the seed, which is Jesus, should come, to whom the promise was made. So to whom was the promise made? Abraham and his descendants. And it was appointed through angels by the hand of a mediator. Now, a mediator does not mediate for one only, but God is one. Is the law then against the promise of God? Certainly not. For if there had been a law given which could have given life, truly righteousness would have been by the law. So he's saying here, hey, the law, these works of that you're supposed to do to stay within covenant, that's not what saved you. It never saved you. So again, that understanding is correct. It doesn't change there. But the scripture has confined all under sin, that the promise by faith in Jesus Christ might be given to those who believe. But before faith came, we were kept under guard by the law, kept by the faith, or kept for the faith, which would afterward be revealed. So what he's saying here is the law was to prevent humanity, or to prevent specifically the Jews, from going further into sin. The law was not designed to save you. It's designed to keep you from becoming worse. It's saying that these transgressions, these things that humanity was taught to do, were pervasive. They were leading us astray. And so with Jewish law, those laws were not designed to save you, but to keep you inside the covenant. It was the pen that kept, or the guardrails that kept you safe within covenant with God, so you didn't leave, because faith was what was needed, right? And of course, we talk about this later. It's faith was always the thing that saved humanity, right? In the Old Testament, it was faith in what God was going to do, the coming Messiah. But you bore that out through your actions, right? That's what kept you in covenant. That's where your faith was. And this is where I think this aligns very well with James and how this all sort of matches up. Because if we go to James 2, right? Infamous section for a lot of, I'm just going to get rid of all of my non-photo blue pencils here, because I think we've already kind of talked about that. Because the law bringing a curse, right? I think we've kind of already addressed that. It was more about, the law is about keeping, he's trying to say the law was the guardrail that kept you in covenant with God. So then, because in James, a lot of people have talked about, and this is actually, I have met people who lost their faith over this conflict. I have always seen what James is saying, that faith without works is dead, is saying if you believe something, right? We'll come to that in a second. I think Paul does sort of address that later, or it does address that question. So we have, for me, the faith without works argument was never that the works themselves saved you, but rather if you're not doing something, if you're not doing the good works, if you're not going and doing those things that God has commanded you to do, then you ultimately have no faith, right? Faith requires action. It's one of the, if I believe that I can fly, but I never jump off that roof, I don't believe I can fly. Now, I like to point out, I don't believe I can fly, which is why I don't go jumping off of roofs or out of perfectly good airplanes, parachute, even with a parachute. I ain't doing it. That airplane had better be on fire, and I better be told that it's not just on fire, it's going down a little too hard, because otherwise I might get out of that plane. Because I know I can't fly. And I know gravity's the law. Just saying. But that's my thing. I don't believe I can fly. I have no faith that I can fly. So I don't try to fly. But if I said I did, but I never try to fly, I don't actually believe it, do I? That's what James is saying. Our actions are born out of our beliefs. So faith without actions is dead. The new perspective on Paul, because what Paul is saying is the reason for these rules and these laws to follow was to keep you from falling astray and out of covenant with God. That's what that was for, and that's kind of gone now. We don't need to necessarily, like, again, the covenant has changed, so we don't need to necessarily follow these very specific good works, meaning the works of Mosaic law. But what James is saying here, he's not talking about the Mosaic law works. He's talking about doing just good works, helping your fellow men, giving food, clothing, shelter, leading people to Christ. That's a good work. Meeting their material needs. That's what he's talking about. Doing justice, right? That is what James is talking about here. So what we have is, in English, we've conflated the argument to mean that James and Paul are talking about the same thing, and they're not. Paul is talking about Mosaic law in order to keep you within covenant, within the Old Testament covenant, covenantal system. James is talking about actually just doing good things for people. That should be a natural outgrowth. Doing good things for people is a natural outgrowth of being a Christian. Whereas Paul is saying these rules to keep you within covenant those don't apply anymore because their role is gone. So this new perspective doesn't really change theology so much. It merely it brings a few more things back into harmony. That makes more sense now. But the other thing, I think the biggest thing here is it. I think if we'd had this understanding from the beginning, a lot of things could have been avoided. This is why I believe exploring the text from the understanding of the culture at the time in not our own culture is so important. Because if you understand what Paul is saying about this, the arguments about the law, what he is saying is he's really talking about a change in how the kingdom of God works, right? It's gone from the it's gone through several motivations, right. Exactly. Titan James is discussing good deeds. You're just saying it a different way from me. I'm saying that your good works are supposed to be um, expressions of your faith, right? Again, an apple tree is going to produce apples. That's why it's an apple tree. Otherwise, it'd be something else. Same thing. Titan's phrase here, I like it, is James is discussing. I'll put it up on the thing, but for those who are listening, James is discussing good deeds / structures being built on a foundation of love and relationship. Yeah, we're saying the same thing. You're not doing the good works to be saved. They are simply, from the way I would express it, is they are natural outgrowths of being saved. So that's what James is talking about. But again, the good works James is talking about, and the good works and the works of the law that Paul is talking about are two different things. That's the key element here. That's why that sort of brings them back into harmony a lot easier than what other people maybe have done. The other thing is it changed I think the big perspective on or the big change in the new perspective on Paul is it brings us back to that Deuteronomy 32 divine counsel situation, right? Right? It is this change of philosophy. I think it fits very well with this idea of the kingdom mentality, which is at the Tower of Babel, God divorces humanity, right? He's like, I'm fine. Y'all don't want me as God, then I ain't gonna be your God anymore. You may have these other spirits. Now, I like Heiser's work on this. He doesn't give them over to devils. And for this term, I'm using the word devil. I'm going to define it this way. Demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. Devils are supernatural beings that are opposed to God. So I guess a demon could be a devil, but not all devils are demons, kind of a thing, right? These are, we would call them angelic forces that were given roles, but they corrupted themselves. They got power hungry. They liked being worshipped. So they also got corrupted. And that's why in the Psalms, when God talks about God sitting down at the table and he's addressing him, he's like, y'all are sons of God, y'all are divine beings, but you're going to die. I'm going to take care of all of y'all because y'all have screwed this up. I don't think God handed humanity over to evil creatures. He gave them over to divine beings that he gave them the role of ruling humanity correctly in 70 or 72, depending on the translation, different sets, right? Those were the tribes, the initial tribes, initial languages. And those spirits were supposed to rule over them in justice and in mercy, and they didn't. They liked being worshipped. They corrupted themselves with humanity. So that's why God chooses Abraham. Abraham is God's portion. That's what Israel is. He takes Abraham out of this other system. He makes a new nation. That's Israel. That is his portion. That is the nation over which God's spirit reigns. Michael is, again, but because God can't, he's still divorced from humanity, he puts Michael, the chief angel, over, or the chief archangel over. Okay, so even that's a bit of a misnomer. We'll talk about this more with the Nephilim because it all very much ties together. Michael is not Jesus. He is the prince over Israel. That's his role. He is the highest archangel, yes, but he's not the king. He's not chief of the archangels. I mean, he's not the one in charge of the archangels. I would argue that's actually Jesus. We'll come back to that. But Michael is the top archangel, and he's put over Israel. That's God's portion. He's like, Michael, I know you're going to do right by me. You're going to do right by these people. So he's over Israel. That is the king. And so to be in the Old Testament saved, you had to leave the system you were in and go to Michael. Think of it that way, right? It was like a theological. So becoming Jewish in the Old Testament, if you were a Gentile, you became Jewish. It was like a theological. I just forgot the word. You were a theological refugee. That's what you were. You were leaving a fallen system and going to the good one, right? But you were allowed to. You were immigrating. That's the idea. It's a kingdom. You were immigrating into it. What Jesus does is he then says, nope, the kingdom now, which is the kingdom of God, is now going to go out to you. So it is now decentralized in going to humanity to save us from underneath these fallen systems. Because at the cross, Jesus conquered all of it. Like he now owns it. So now the kingdom can go out very legally to us. That's why we are ambassadors of Christ. That's the best way to think of it. We are kings, we're priests, we're ambassadors. We are now Christians, we're part of the kingdom, but we're in enemy territory. We're in a fallen system because he has not, even though Jesus is over it now, he hasn't quite God hasn't made them his footstool yet. So that mentality of what Paul is talking about is saying, hey, we don't need these guideposts anymore, these very specific Mosaic rules, because now the spirit, the faith that actually saves us, is going to everyone. That is the big change. And some have argued that it would sort of end racism in the earlier church if we'd had that perspective. I don't know. I think that's overly optimistic. I think people suck in general, so I think we would have found a way to work around that, right? For me, I've always said it's the story of Noah. It's the story of Adam and Eve. I mean, it's like if you can look at that and still be racist, then and still think, well, there's something different from us. You know, black people are different from white people, and Chinese people are different from. It's like if you look at the story of Adam and Eve, and if you look at the story of Noah, and you still have that belief, there's anything else is going to do to change that. Clearly, we're all children from the same parents. If you have to reject that portion of the Bible in order to have sort of racist views, anyways, right? So I don't think that necessarily the kingdom mentality and this new perspective on Paul fixes that. Some people have made that claim. I don't know that it does. but it fits very nicely. I think it fits very nicely with what we see in the rest of the text. It does tie into this Deuteronomy 32 because it refocuses Paul's conversation about the kingdom more than in that we're going out to the kingdom than anything else. That's it. But it's a great. It gives nuance. I think it allows you to be more sympathetic to the Judaizers instead of. It's very easy for us to condemn them and not see them in their where they were. Right. They were doing the best they could. I think they weren't trying to be proud or whatever, or necessarily stuck in tradition. I think they were just trying their best to figure this out. We see that in the book of Acts, right? We see the early Christians just trying to figure this stuff out. So it allows us to give them a little bit more mercy and grace, I think, and also just allows us to harmonize what Paul and what James is saying a lot better, and just reinforces the kingdom mentality that we're talking about, and we have been talking about for a while. This Deuteronomy 32 understanding, by the way, for those who may be new, Deuteronomy 32, right, in most Bibles is going to read that mankind was apportioned out according to the sons of Israel. That's because most Bibles are based on the Masoretic text, which there's a good argument. I'm going to have a friend on one of these Saturday night hangouts that we're going to start doing, because yes, Saturday night seems to be the most popular night anyway. So we're going to talk about how the Septuagint seems to be more closely aligned with the original text, and what we find with the Septuagint and some other earlier texts is that Deuteronomy 32 reads not the sons of Israel, but the sons of God. So the idea is God divorces humanity, and there's 70 or 72. Again, there's some variance there in some of the texts, spirits and languages. So each language had its own spirit over, and that's the divine council. And we see the divine council all throughout the Old Testament. So that's the basic idea, is that what God is doing is reclaiming humanity from these other spirits, right? He divorces humanity, but now he's got to wait for humanity to come back to him. And now with Jesus, he's going to them, and he's reclaiming those who he has chosen from and called from these other spirits, from these other kingdoms, to come into the new kingdom. So I think it fits very, very well, gives some interesting nuance. And when you go back to reread Paul, if this in the book of Enoch's in your mind, it gives a slightly different flavor to them, and I think that's a good thing. So we've got a couple more questions, then we'll call it for the day. So Mr. D-Knuckle, I had by the way, good morning to you. He asked about the worshippers of El who did not receive the 10. We see in Paul's writings, he talks about God winking at sin in the past, right? It seems like there is a difference between the chosen, right? Those who God chose, the Israelites, and those who worshipped God. It seems like there was a distinction there. I will say this: I'm not 100% on how God did that. People ask, well, what about these people what about the Inuit who never had a chance to hear any of this? God knows who is his, right? That's between him and God. I wish I had an answer for it. I wish there was a solid answer for it. What I can say is the argument does seem to be that you are judged according to your knowledge. This is the basic argument a lot of people have made. And there's an argument that Paul is making this argument as well, that God judges you according to what you know. So if you've never heard of Jesus, if you've never heard of these things, maybe you're judged differently. That it isn't that there isn't reason, and that there should be reason for you to be followers of Jehovah, but you may not have his name, but you know that he exists and he's above these other things, so you could be faithful to him with what you know. That is an argument that is made. My official stance is, I don't know. I'm not God. I think there's the argument that, if just your SOL, that's one argument. I don't know that comports necessarily with what I see with God. I do tend to think that maybe he does judge them differently. All I know is this. I know. And we are supposed to go out and reclaim these people from the nations because he wants to have a relationship with people. And if you don't know his name, if you don't know, who to pray to, if you don't know what makes him happy, what doesn't make him happy, right? Um, then you really can't be in a relationship with him. We're supposed to be in a relationship with him today in our lives, in the material world. This is why I don't think the material and let me say this, I mean supernatural and natural in the traditional sense, means super meaning above, right? It's and really I think material, super material, or paranormal, um, or spiritual versus material is a better phrase, because the supernatural is just as natural as anything else, right? We seem to think that the supernatural is different from the natural world, and that's meant more in a classic sense, material versus spiritual. So I don't think so. The big point here is I think that they go hand in hand. I don't think they are in conflict at all. Our material world has spirits that rule over us. Okay, this is going to make a lot of people happy, but whatever. I think when we see the way politics plays out is far more about the supernatural than is ever the material. It just is. That's why when you saw a bunch of leftists go absolutely nuts under Trump, it's because they, on a supernatural level, on a spiritual level, they understood God was doing something that wasn't in line with what the demons they are under didn't make those demons happy. That's it. The spirits that they were under weren't happy by the fact that Trump did where he was. That's it. That's why they seem to go effing nuts. I mean, I mean, look. I'm sorry, you can't tell me that when you look at Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, that if you look in her eyes, that you see a sane human being. That there's something really wrong with a lot of these people, and you can see it in their eyes. They're just something's wrong. It's the demons. They are spiritually influenced, and these demons were not happy. I think they're much happier now, but that's a different conversation. But the point is, the spiritual and the material are absolutely intertwined. They are not separate. So again, but as far as the question of the worshippers of El, I don't know. I wish I could tell you. I just don't know. I tend to think that God judges justly, and I have to trust in that. Okay, so Titan, I think there are those demons, devils, that are not aligned with Satan, their fathers being the watchers. So here's the thing. Again, so Titan, we're going to talk about that. So his comment is that there are devils and demons not necessarily aligned to Satan. Here's the thing. We're going to talk about that more when we get to the Watchers, because this goes back to, again, the Deuteronomy 32, what we discussed today. I don't think God hands humanity over to devils. I think he handed us over to angelic beings who were in good standing, but they corrupted themselves. I don't think there is one singular event that gets us the 1/3. We see, we look at the book of Revelation and we see Satan falling to earth with 1/3 of the angels or of the divine beings. I don't think that event has occurred. I think it's a future event. I think what happens is at that point, God's like midway through the tribulational period or the 7-year period, because the tribulation is the final 3.5 years. I think that's where God's like, okay, we know who's on what side. You've had time to prove. Y'all are out, right? I don't think it's a singular event. I think they are corrupted over time, and then by the time we get there, we're gonna know who's who, and then they're kicked out. So we're talking about that more when we get to the Watchers and who they are, where they came from, because I don't think you're wrong. I think you're probably right, but I think it's more complicated than that. The sins of the fathers. So okay, so Gene, the sins of the fathers, I've always taken that as more of a, because you're saying, I do think it falls on the. I think what is meant there, again, this goes back to our understanding versus the cultural understanding. children who grow up with deadbeat dads, and they suffer from the evil of their parents. The parents who are righteous, their children tend to prosper more, right? We tend to forget in the Old Testament, a lot of those things are material that they're talking about. Fathers who sin, fathers who are who are doing evil, they tend to bring evil upon their family, and their children suffer for it. And oftentimes those children will repeat that same evil. You don't have to look very hard into any literature to read, and by literature I mean psychological and medical journals, to read some dude who's beating the crap out of his kid because he has anger issues. He was abused as a child. Those people who are sexually abusing children today, they were sexually abused as a child. I do think the sins of the father do carry on. The problem is we think that means I have committed a sin and my son will pay for it. No, what they're talking about is, I think, again, because they're talking, for them, a lot of that was physical, right? It's the wealth that you achieved, the status you achieved. That's what they're talking about. It is the actions of a father detrimentally hurting the next generation is more what that's about. So I agree with you. God's not going to be like, well, I'm sorry, Jason, but your father um, got drunk over here, so I'm going to punish you for that. No, what he would be saying is, I'm sorry, but your dad did all these things that gave you bad habits, that brought misery into your home, that brought poverty into your home, so that changed your destiny. You could have prospered, but he screwed up, and so now you're doing this. This is the natural result of his actions. Again, this is why I believe forgiveness is one of the greatest actions, or is the greatest evidence of God, because in our world, everything is action reaction, right? It's causality. Forgiveness requires something outside of causality to say you can stop that ball, right? That's just how I view it. Now, the Nephilim were absolutely monsters, right? Uh, we're talking about the Nephilim real quick. Yeah, the Nephilim, again, we're going to talk again. We'll get way more into the Nephilim. That is, the Nephilim were cannibals. They were monsters. They were bloodthirsty creatures. They were, and again, now, why is that? We're going to discuss that more, because again, that's an entire conversation. Iron Digger. Okay. Am I claiming Trump is a Christian? This is insanity. I never said he was a Christian. Never once did I say anything about Trump being a Christian. I said he was used by God. Just like, in fact, when he was running, I said this very publicly. Nebuchadnezzar. I said I thought he was closer to Nebuchadnezzar. A lot of people have pointed, and I think that's probably correct. He's actually more like Cyrus the Great. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Isaiah 45, things like that. I never said he was a Christian. I think he was used by God. Now, now for everyone who's like, well, but he wasn't a Christian. God can't use Christians, or God can't use anyone but Christians. I'm sorry. Let's go throughout the entirety of humanity and tell me where God's like, yep, I'm only going to use good people. David was a murderer and a rapist. Anyone who says he didn't rape Bathsheba is covering that sin up. That was a rape. Moses was a murderer. But then let's get to the other nations. Nebuchadnezzar, not a Christian. Not, and of course, Christianity didn't exist, but he wasn't in alignment with God, right? I just said his name. Cyrus the Great, not a Jew, used by God. Hold on, Iron Digger. Do I think he's a reincarnation? No, I don't think he's a reincarnation at all. I'm just saying. Well, you're not. Well, hold on, Iron Dogger. Sorry, give me a second. I never said he was a reincarnation, right? What I'm saying is God uses certain people. There are patterns. People, he uses who he wills. God could have used Hillary, but Hillary made an alignment that I think is clearly demonic. Look at her. So again, I think Obama was used by God. I just don't think he was the way that we wanted it to be. The thing is, God chose Trump to do something that was against what the demons wanted. They wanted Hillary because Hillary was aligned with a very evil group of people, and you can't argue that. There are truly evil people in this world. Hillary is aligned with those people. Look at the meat puppet we have right now. That man is evil. He is aligned with evil. Again, he's where he is because God puts him. God puts people where he puts them. We have to understand that. Why did the left go nuts with Trump? Because he was used by God to disrupt their plans. We have to understand God works through the people of this planet. Again, the supernatural and the material are the same thing. They are not, right? They are not as separate as we like to think. God does not need to use a Christian to do his purpose. God chooses who he used. Again, look at Pharaoh. He chose Pharaoh. Was Pharaoh the good guy in that story? No. He even said, I've chosen Pharaoh, I've raised him up, and Pharaoh made his choices. In the last 5, God took over. Right? God's got this under control. He, however, moves in ways that we don't like sometimes. Trump, I don't think Trump, I've never claimed Trump is a Christian. I'm not one of those people who thought Trump was the end all be all. I thought he was just where he was because God put him there. And he put him there to do things that did not make Satan happy. That's it. That's all that was about. Now, you can disagree, that's fine, but I would like to point out what he did during his time rapidly disrupted a lot of evil things. And we're seeing it now with the current administration. Why did the current administration get rid of programs that went after child sex traffickers? Why is he being so friendly to China, who is one of the great persecutors of the church? The administration before Trump created ISIS, knowingly created ISIS, and funded them, and provided money for them and weapons for them to destroy and persecute Christians in the Middle East. That's fact. That's not even a question. Trump destroyed them. Trump simply wasn't in bed with the same evil that these people were. I don't need to look up to Trump. I don't need to worship Trump. I don't need to think Trump was even a good guy. He's simply the tool that God used to achieve a purpose. That purpose is against the evil, right? That he was against the evil of this world, the evil that persecutes Christians, the evil that likes that likes pedophilia. I'm sorry, that is the fight that we're in right now. We have a group of elites, and again, I'm not talking necessarily about the Pizzagate stuff. Look at Epstein. That's all this. Like Epstein is all the evidence that Pizzagate was real. It's just not the Pizzagate everyone thought, right? That's the problem. We have a lot of very powerful people who are very corrupt, and they're doing evil things that harm a lot of people. That's why the demons weren't happy with Trump. He was a disruption to that plan. Not necessarily. Well, hold on. Come on. With what? Did he not disrupt all those things? He did. Now, were there a lot of things that he did that I didn't like? Absolutely. But he absolutely disrupted a lot of things that caused them to overstep. People are now seeing, right? People are seeing the evil of our government right now, and the people in power right now. More people more of these sex traffickers were arrested under Trump than under any other administration. There's a lot of evil out there. People are waking up to it. I think that's why he was called. Again, broader reason I think he was called. Again, this goes back to him being Cyrus. He moved our what was it? Ambassadors, they live in consulates. Anyway, whatever the word is, the building where the ambassadors are, embassies, there we are. He moved our embassy to Jerusalem. He recognized Jerusalem. That was a big, big move. That was something that is important because remember, guys, we still got to get to a temple being in Israel. We have to have a temple on the Temple Mount. We have to have someone who negotiates world peace or at least some form of peace treaty in the Middle East. These things still have to occur. Prior administration ain't going to do it, and this administration certainly didn't do it, but Trump did far more to get us down that road than anyone else. Again, I've always said, I don't think the Antichrist actually creates the peace. He comes into it, right? He is all I've ever said about Trump was that he was fulfilling purposes, right? Well, hold on. Are you saying that the Bible has been corrupted? Because we've had very intense conversations about that one, and we can see that it really hasn't been. There are differences in certain versions, and we've talked about it, but it's known. Doesn't really change anything. Again, I go back to the world is corrupt. There are evil spirits that are still running everything, and God has a purpose. All I've ever said about Trump, and this is where the end of it, because we're at hour 20 into everything, is that Trump was chosen to do things that changed the plans of a lot of very, very evil people. That's all I've ever said about him. In the same way, right? In the same way that Nebuchadnezzar was chosen by God, that Cyrus was chosen by God, that many people have been chosen by God who were not godly people to fulfill a purpose that he had intended. That's all I've ever said. Now, I will say this, though. The fact that it hacked off the demons is kind of the first clue. Well, humanity has killed everyone since day one. So, for those who maybe can't read what's going on at the same time, Iron Dogger said that humanity's been killing one another for lifetimes over religious beliefs. Humanity doesn't need a reason to kill us. We kill each other for no reason, right? That's all it was. We don't need a reason to kill each other. We just do. That's the entire point. Humans are evil. We are born evil. We stay evil. That is why Christ had to come to redeem us from that evil. Now, that's just how we are, right? Again, it's the spirits. You can recognize the good someone does, but just because someone does something good doesn't make them a Christian. Like that is the thing that I find very bizarre. It's like, well, you can't praise someone for doing something good. I think there were things that Obama did that were good. I just recognized that he had a bigger problem. His overall beliefs were antithetical to what mine were. He was working ultimately, I think, for Satan. Now, again, God's in control of all things. Well, but okay, over religious beliefs, well, great, but then why do Christians kill each other? Why do we kill each other for every reason? The reasons are excuses. We kill each other because we want to. I mean, that's it. I mean, why do you? I mean, we murder each other because we're inherently evil creatures. That is why Christ had to come. This idea that humans are basically good is not found in Scripture, and it certainly isn't found anywhere in the world. Right? You can go find tribes before anyone ever showed up. You can go to the South America and find tribes that never been in contact with the outside world. All of them had the same beliefs. They were still murdering each other, right? Well, great. Then why did okay, don't even talk about the Crusades with me. The Crusades were a political war. Let's talk about politics real quick, right? Look at everyone points to the Crusades for holy wars. Great. Let's put the Crusades aside. Let's put the Crusades and Islam aside for 2 seconds. Name 3 wars outside of the Crusades. Again, Crusades and anything to do with Islam. Name 3 wars that were religiously inspired. You can't, because the vast majority of times wars are fought over political reasons. It is power. That's what people are fighting over. And the Crusades happened after 1,000 years of Islamic assault on property and territories owned by the Holy Roman Empire, which was the Roman Empire before that, which was the West. At one point, Islam ran all the way into France. It was the Crusades were a result of Islamic assault, and here's why Islam is so important in this, and why I said everything outside of Islam, because Islam is not a religion. It is a political structure that masquerades as a religion. It is a true theocracy. If you understand Islam, it is a political structure. It is designed for one thing: to create the caliphate. It is a political structure with its own set of laws. That is why it's designed. That's why it was created. That is why there's so much warfare with Islam, because it is trying to conquer the world. That's what it's supposed to do. You can go and find any Muslim in the world, and you can look at there are plenty of Muslims who don't want to necessarily blow people up or whatever. great, but they absolutely would support a caliphate. That's the problem, because it is a political structure. Politics, again, is not separate from the spiritual. That's what I'm saying. The spiritual and the physical are the same thing. These spirits that all these nations are under, they're fighting for power. Remember, they were corrupted. God handed humanity over to these spirits because there was a divorce. Humanity and God had a separation. These spirits corrupted themselves over the years. That's why God is going to destroy them as well. But all these nations are at war because the spirits are at war. That's what that's about. But if you want to get to the single heart of every single human is a murderer and a thief and a liar. Every human is. It's just not all of us act on it. Not all of us go out and murder people. Not all of us go out and do terrible things, but it's still in our heart. That's why we needed Christ. Now, on the political, God does what he does. But all you need to know, well, consciousness is that tiny remnant of God. But how many people ignore their conscience? Not consciousness, that's sentience. There are plenty of very evil people. But here's the thing. If you've got kids, you don't have to teach kids to be bad. You teach them to be good. Humans are inherently selfish. There is no way you can look throughout human history and say that humans are not evil, selfish, violent creatures. We are. We are. That is why Jesus had to come. He had to come so we could reject those things. That's what Christianity is about. It's rejecting the shadow self, as you say it. Because I'm sorry, look throughout human history. Humans suck. We are terrible creatures. Show me one tribe that wasn't violent and evil. Everyone was violent and evil. Everyone's been violent and evil because that's who we are. We have to choose to be good, but we need God to do it. The politics, that's about spirits. That's always about that. God has a plan, and God chooses who he does to do certain things. All you got to do, again, I think Titan said I think it was Titan, said the proof is always in the pudding, right? Who hates who? What stuck pig squeals when something occurs? That tells you everything you need to know, right? It's like, I'm sorry, but if China, one of the evilest regimes on the planet at least at this moment, is squealing about something, I'm thinking it's probably a good thing. When the rapists and pedophiles and those who seek to control and dominate, when they're bitching about things, I know something good is happening. Here's the problem. We live in a world where there is no one before. Well, no, there are no good people without Jesus. There's no good people without God. That's the entire point of the Bible. No one is good. No one is righteous. The Bible goes out of its way to tell us no one is good. Jesus had to come because he was the only good one. He had to suffer on our behalf. People who were good and righteous in the Old Testament were good and righteous in the Old Testament because of God. God intervened in their lives. That's what the laws, again, the entire conversation about the new perspective on Paul, that's what those laws were about, was to keep people within covenant with God so that they could be good. Because if you're not, you're going to do evil, selfish, terrible things. Well, but so Iron Dogger, explain your comment right there. Right there. Humanity has an opportunity to end the endless rising and repeating catastrophic failures while expecting different results without recognizing the insanity of it all. You just proved everything I've just said. Humanity has not changed since day one. Why? Because we're inherently evil. That is why. We are selfish. We are cruel. We are blind to injustice around us. It just is. That is why we keep repeating these things. That's why we need someone from outside, which is Jesus, to come and change that. That is the role of Christ. Yes, Jesus was a sword. He was a sword come to destroy that which is evil, to separate us from our selfishness. That's why the Bible is so important. The text, it is sharper than a two-edged sword. It is separating right and wrong. It is to show us what we need to do. Well, but we've already had the Savior. We're supposed to be doing good work, but we understand that the good work is fulfilled when he returns. That's the entire point. We're supposed to do good works. That's what James is talking about. Our good works are manifested out of our love for God. They are the fruit from our tree. Good works should be what we are doing as Christians. If that's why faith without works is dead. That's why when James himself says in chapter 2, it says, you believe in God. Well, great, but even the demons believe in God. It's not about belief. It's about faith, and that faith is expressed through our actions. We are to do good works. We're not waiting on the Savior to do the good thing because the Savior has already come. But this world is not going to be fixed without Jesus. That is why he's coming. That is why the world's going the way it is. Jesus is coming to fix it. He is coming to put down the spirits that are over humanity. He is coming to put down the evil of this world. Yes, it's a return. That's the entire point. The Bible begins and ends the same spot, a wedding and with God living with humanity. Remember, chapter 1, God rests in his temple. But where's his temple? It's the entire world, right? The temple is the universe that we inhabit. He's with Adam and Eve. The end, where is he? He's in New Jerusalem with humanity. That's the point. We live in a world where the beginning and the end are the same. We get to come finally back to the point where we are at one with God. That's the end. It is up to Jesus to fix this. Now, we as individual Christians have to do the good that we can do. We advocate for the good that we can do, and we have done good things throughout the centuries. I would point out any great advancement, both really in both the socio-political world, the granting of human rights, have all been done by Christians, right? They've all been done by Christians because our good works need to be in the world. That's why we do the good works. We advocate for what's right. But this is never fixed until Jesus shows up. That's it. Everything until then is this interplay of evil spirits and God's hand moving to guide us to that point that we see in the book of Revelation, when that man of sin is finally revealed. Again, I think that man of sin is going to end up being a Nephilim, but whatever. But when that man of sin is revealed, that's why he gets to be destroyed. And that's when Jesus shows up. He fixes everything for 1,000 years, and then we finally get to go into eternity. That's it. That's how this works. We are all evil. We are selfish, evil creatures, which is why we need Jesus. That's why the law, again, that's what we were talking about. The law was to keep people within good standing and with God, because of our own desire, of our own will, we will sin. We will all sin because we are all evil. We need to be redeemed. If there was a human who didn't need to be redeemed, then Jesus was not needed. The entirety of the Old Testament, the laws, the rules, the regulations, was to give us Jesus so that we could be saved. He's the one who saved the Old Testament. It's their faith in the coming Messiah that saved them. It's our faith in him that saves us. And he redeems us out of our sin so that we can be true ambassadors. That's what we are. Now, the question is, if you're talking about an individual, that's how that works. Well, opportunities are often wasted. Opportunities are always wasted. Humanity is always going to waste it because we're selfish, evil creatures. That's what the book says. And we're going to waste it. Again, all throughout the book of Revelation, what do we see? Time and time again, it says, in fact, let me pull it up. Where'd it go? And men were scorched with great heat, and they blasphemed the name of God, who has power over these plagues, and they did not repent they did not repent and give him glory. The entire book of Revelation tells us we are going to have every opportunity to repent, and they ain't. And humanity writ large will not. We're not. As a species, we're not. That is why the individual matters. That's why Christ came. He is saving out of the Gentiles those whom he will. That's what the Christian life is about. It's about getting to know God. It's about being in the right relationship with God. That's what Christianity is. This planet is we as a species, we're not going to get this fixed because we can't. We are selfish, greedy creatures. We are hateful creatures. Wars are done for power. Like I said, religious wars, that's a joke. We don't need. In fact, you know what the first, right? Do you know what the first actual declaration of war read in human history? Not that we weren't fighting before that, not that there weren't plenty of tribes trying to kill each other beforehand. But you know what the very, very first declaration of war was about? It was an Egyptian pharaoh. I forget his name, but he said it was his big claim that the reason he had to go to war with this nation was that the royal hippopotamus was wailing and moaning and keeping him awake at night, and it was because of the evil of this other nation that he had to go to war with them. I am not kidding. Humans are selfish, evil creatures. We are hateful creatures. We kill each other because that's what we want. We are evil. That is why God is here. That's why God is saving us. That's why he's talking to us. He's working through his word, through his followers. That is to bring us closer to him individually. But as a species, we're screwed because we're evil, spiteful people. We will kill each other because they wear the wrong color. We'll kill each other because of shoes. We'll kill each other because of hippopotami. I will not say hippopotamuses ever. We will kill each other for money, for sex, for drugs, because someone just looks at us the wrong way. That we are evil creatures that have to be redeemed. That's why Jesus came. He will come again and he will redeem the whole planet. That's what we look forward to. But for the time being, we do have a role, which is to do what is good. Again, James, faith without works is dead. If you're not out there doing good things, if you're not helping people, if you're not trying to make the world a slightly better place, you're not doing your faith. You're not living your faith. And I would argue if you're not living your faith, is your faith even alive? James would say no. That's where I fall. I also believe God is in control of all things. I also believe that's what's expressly given to us in the Bible. He picks and chooses. I also think there's evil at foot in the world. All you have to see is, well, who screams when evil is done? Or when the evildoers are screaming, that's when you know God's at work. That's all you got to do. So on that note, love all of y'all. We will see y'all later. Again, Alan, thanks y'all for what you've given. We'll actually probably be sending this month's or I guess April's funds this next weekend, so it has a little bit more time to get there, so we're not waiting till last minute, because Western Union apparently likes to take its time. So if you can PayPal me the money, I will send it and I will cover the cost of transmitting the funds. So y'all be good. I won't be on Daniela's show tonight. Got things to do. But we'll see y'all on Thursday. We're kind of coming to that point in the Nephilim story where we're going to talk more about the Watchers. We're actually talking about what they were, what they came from, who they were, where are they now, that kind of thing, and actually start getting more into the meat of it. Now that we've sort of established how we know what we know, we can start getting into them in more depth. So that's going to be a lot of fun, because I know y'all have all been waiting for this. So like I said, we're going to be there for a while because there's so much to talk about. As you've seen, they keep popping up. The subject of the Nephilim is sort of that key that allows you to unlock the rest of the scriptures. So anyway, y'all be good. We'll see y'all next time.